Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie Burnside, and for this presentation, I chose to share the findings from my second article review titled Investigating the Hypothesis that Coping and Non-Attachment Mediate Complicated Grief and Hoarding. To put it simply, the research conducted in this article was specifically targeted to relate the level of grief the subjects are facing, and how likely it is that hoarding symptoms will begin or continue based on their need to find comfort in physical objects. This article was particularly interesting to me as I have a very close friend who lost their mother just over 2 years ago. Prior to losing their mother, she had already showed signs of hoarding lifestyle. Since the loss of her mother, the habit has become almost more of a goal as well as a way to find comfort and connection to her deceased mother. As we see here, the relationship between grief and hoarding. Hoarding is often triggered by a traumatic loss or event. Common contributors to hoarding disorder include divorce, poverty, or death of a loved one. Hoarding becomes an avoidance tactic and often is a way to avoid grieving by holding on to meaningful objects. Although past research shows that hoarding is associated with stressful life events involving loss or deprivation, the temporal relationship between the onset of symptoms and these events was not completely clear, which was a big reason for this research. In the study, researchers examined the relationship between the number of events involving loss or deprivation before, during, and after the events versus the onset of hoarding and various hoarding related beliefs, such as emotional attachment to possessions and symptom severity. Further, they examined whether perceived social support moderated the influence of these events on emotional attachment to objects. The method of this research was for 104 subjects with hoarding problems responding to a series of instruments to assess the history and timing of the traumatic and stressful events versus the loss and deprivation in relation to the onset of their symptoms. They used self-report tools, evaluating the severity of their hoarding beliefs and motivations, and also rating their level of depression, anxiety, general stress, and their perceived social support or lack thereof. In this chart, we see some of the factors of what can lead to hoarding, the beliefs and attachments, as well as emotional reactions, and what type of or level of hoarding it can cause. The data results were screened by these participants using an SPSS version 25, which showed the descriptive statistics of the variables used in the study and where hoarding correlates from the weakly to moderately with all variables assessed. The authors explained in the article how the findings are important because they allow researchers to show the hierarchical regression of hoarding and how it relates to the depression in stages. The results imply that though complicated grief may have a large explanation of grief-related hoarding or mental disengagement due to grief, these risk factors can explain perhaps why individuals experiencing grief may attempt to obtain a sense of security from these items, old or new, to mentally distract themselves from processing the negative emotions brought on by their loss. The final data results showed that events happening before hoarding did not interact with perceived social support to influence emotional attachment to objects, and that having the propensity to distract oneself mentally from negative emotions could also be viewed as a risk factor that leads to the maintenance and even the development of hoarding disorder. The number of events involving loss or deprivation occurring before hoarding was related to increased emotional attachment to possessions, whereas the events happening after the onset of hoarding were related to increased concerns about memory as drivers of hoarding symptoms. In conclusion, the researchers showed that the timing of the traumatic and stressful life events related to loss and deprivation is associated with different hoarding phenotypes, including beliefs and motivation, as we saw on the chart a couple slides ago. For hoarding, it also confirmed that by longitudinal studies, these findings may be relevant for therapeutic and preventative measures. And here is a citation of the article if you're interested in reading. It was extremely interesting to read, and I hope that you enjoyed the presentation.